Hi, welcome to the Bitesize QI video focusing on measuring for improvement and looking at some case studies here to emphasize the importance of collecting continuous data, in other words, data over time, and using SPC or statistical process control charts. My name is Sid Beach and I'm the Quality Improvement Training Lead here at CLCH. We have 3 case studies for you. The first is looking at pie charts. Now the question I hear all the time is, are pie charts useful? The simple answer here is no. Pie charts are not useful, particularly for measuring for improvement. Now, why is that? My challenge for you in looking at this pie chart is to tell me which out of the blue and purple sections is the largest and how much they correspond to in terms of the total pie here on the screen. It's difficult to say, and that's because as humans, we struggle to identify proportions in relation to the entire circle. It's just not our nature. The second difficulty with pie charts is we do not know the total sum here. In this case, we're looking at the proportion of people within Toronto in Canada in terms of their levels of education. Do you know the population of Toronto off the top of your head? My answer, or my guess, is no. The third drawback of pie charts is that it's really difficult to track improvement. How do we compare 2 different pies next to one another? Again, we would rely on our skills in order to draw the difference in proportions, and that's not something that humans are very good at. So, how would we present this data? I think the best way is a bar chart here, and we could plot this over time if we wanted to by putting 2 bars next to one another, say in 2016 and again in 2026. In this case, it's just shown as one date for now. And here we've also plotted the numbers to make it easier to visualize and interpret. Now you may want to do this by size order instead of the random order previously shown, and that helps us to quickly see that secondary diplomas are the majority of people, as well as bachelor's degrees. I know that pie charts are colourful, and that's why people often choose to use them, but there's no reason why we couldn't make our bar chart colourful, as shown. So, summary, please do not use pie charts. Try to plot data over time, but if you can't, then use a bar chart. This second case study looks at coronary artery bypass graft mortality rates. In other words, did people die during or after this procedure? This is real data from Massachusetts in the United States, and it's looking at the mortality rates of these patients. Now, looking at this data in a static format shown here, we can see we're comparing year on year. The mortality rate in this case seems to have reduced from 5% to 4%. So anyone would say that this has been an improvement. However, if we look a bit deeper at the data, we know that this is anything but. Plotting the data continuously, in other words, plotting the data over time, we can see that actually this data tells a completely different story. And so the changes that were made in January, and you can see the 2 colours correspond to the pre and post intervention. The red boxes show the previous data from that bar chart from 5% to 4%, and actually here we can see that the mortality rate for this particular procedure in Massachusetts was reducing, and it was reducing from 9% to about 2%, and actually after the intervention was introduced, the mortality rate shot up. So in this case, there hasn't been an improvement. In fact, this intervention has made things worse, and more patients died as a result of it. Really important to collect and plot data continuously wherever possible. Continuing with the theme of mortality, here we're looking at the mortality rate under the cares of GPs in a practice in Northern England. Now this data is plotted over time, and it's plotted over a 21-year period. This is publicly available data from 1977 through to 1998. Now this is a line chart, and it doesn't tell us a lot. It's not a run chart, and it's not an SPC chart, so we can't tell if there's any special cause variation present. Let's plot it on an SPC. Now, if you were to do this in practice, remember there's an SPC tool used by the CLCH QI team, and there's also a tool on Live QI, the system we use to track and monitor our QI projects at CLCH. So you don't need to have a statistical knowledge to be able to do this. Looking at this particular SPC, we're looking at the average number of deaths per GP. So in this case, there were 7 GPs in this practice in Northern England, and this is the average number of deaths per GP. So there are around 10 or so a year in this GP practice on average. There's no special cause variation present in this case. Now, the average data doesn't tell us enough detail, so perhaps it would be more helpful to plot this data by GP instead of as an average. As I said, there were 7 GPs. Here you can see the cumulative total of deaths per GP in that GP practice over the 21-year period. And you can see some are higher. In this case, GP1 is higher, and some are also lower. In this case, GP7 is a lot lower. Now, that was quite a messy graph with 7 different GPs on it, so I find it helpful to focus on a few. In this case, I've chosen GP1, the highest, GP7, the lowest, and GP3, because they are pretty much on average with the average value there. So the average is shown as a dotted line. This is the cumulative total, so this is adding the number of deaths year on year on year. Now, why might GP7 be lower? And why might GP1 be higher? And why is GP3 on average? Let's focus on GP3 first. So this is the graph of GP3 plotted over that average graph that we had a few slides ago. And you can see here that actually there is an instance of special cause variation. Can you spot it? It's right at the end in 1998. In this case, it's an astronomical point. It's a point below the lower control limit. There's not a shift, there's not a trend, and 2 of the other rules are not present either. So, why might this be? In this case, we found that GP3 was actually semi-retired and therefore seeing fewer patients in the last few years, and this would explain why in 1998, after they had retired, the number was so low. They were just seeing fewer patients. What about GP1? GP1 had a lot higher deaths than other GPs. Now, why might this be? And is there any special cause variation? Now, I'm hoping that you've spotted that there is definitely special cause variation here. There are many astronomical points, as shown in the red. In fact, there are more than 10 points above the upper control limit. As well as that, there is also a shift. And what we mean by that is 8 or more consecutive points above the mean. In this case, there are many points consecutively above the mean. Now, why might this be? It could be that this GP has a specialist interest in palliative medicine and so sees patients nearing the end of their life, and therefore that would make sense that they see a higher number of deaths per year. They could also have a specialist interest in care of the elderly, and again it would make sense that by seeing more elderly patients they are more likely to experience more deaths under their care. Finally, another good example could be that they are full-time, and actually every other GP is part-time. And so again, in proportion, they would see more deaths. In fact, that's not the reason why for any of these GPs, GP1, in fact, is Harold Shipman, who was responsible for the murder of 218 people between 1977 and 1998. Let's go back to the data. So we can see here again, this is the data of the number of deaths under Harold Shipman's care between 1977 and 1998. The solid blue line is plotting all deaths under his care. And the dotted blue line are the number of deaths that were confirmed as natural or inconclusive under the Shipman inquiry in 2001. Now you can see there are 2 astronomical points here. And why might this be? Well, in fact, it's because there were so many inconclusive deaths in 1979 and 1981 because it was 20 years before the Shipman inquiry, and so it was difficult to conclusively say whether these were unlawful killings or natural deaths. But you can see there was already a flag in 1978. Harold Shipman had a higher number of deaths under his care 1 year after he started working in Hyde practice in the north of England. There was an astronomical point, and there were numerous other ones continuously there afterwards. So, my question is, SPCs, could they have caught a killer?